Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018, 09/11. Story 1, A Recipe for Happiness. On my 10th birthday, I picked a dog from the pound. The pound had several beautiful dogs, huskies and German shepherds, sleek blue-nose pit bulls and even a red-bone hound. But the dog that caught my eye was a bow-legged teacup chihuahua with wiry fur and ears that seemed to sprout from his neck. His fur was prickly and he smelled like soggy corn chips. He also ate flies, snatching them out of the air like a clumsy frog. So I named him Renfield. Back then, we lived on 5 acres of golden forest. My favorite spot on the property was a hollow inside a wild hedge. It was the perfect hideout. You could only access the hollow by crawling along a hidden trench because the branches formed a thick, dangerous interlock on all sides. I took Renfield inside the hedge that night. I remember the way sunlight shafted through the leaves and flowers, turning the space into a burrow of soft brown shadows overlaid with coppery light. My little dog looked up at me, eyes shining like amber in the dim. I petted him until he fell asleep. Then I crawled out of the hollow and called his name, intending to confuse him. He panicked immediately, yelping and clawing madly at the impenetrable branches. His terror felt like a gut punch. I crawled back into the hedge. The way he looked at me is burned into my memory, wide-eyed and joyfully relieved, but terrified. That look was all I could think of the day I put him to sleep. I didn't have a choice. I'd have him for 18 years, and had medicated severe heart issues for 4 of those. He was in constant pain, so it was time. But he knew something was wrong. He was so scared, and I scared him even more by crying. Tears always terrified him. I tried to push away the memory of that first night in the hedge, of the way I'd scared him. But I couldn't, and no wonder. Putting him to sleep, I'd trapped him again. Only this time, I had to leave him behind. He was my last lifeline. I felt him slipping away as surely as a drowning man feels a wave carry away his life preserver. My crybaby tendencies didn't start or end with my dog. Take my dad. He'd been in a nursing home for years by that point. He developed Alzheimer's early. The descent was brutal and swift. As if that wasn't enough, he had pancreatic cancer, automatically terminal and unimaginably excruciating. I stopped visiting around that time. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I couldn't do it to him. Just try to imagine, you're in horrific pain, you don't know who or where you are, and your only visitor is a gaunt stranger who bursts into tears whenever they see you. I scared him to death whenever I visited. I made his disorienting, painful days that much worse. Stole what little peace he had. So I stopped. I meant to sit with him at the end, when he'd be in a drug-induced sleep so deep he wouldn't notice me holding his hands and sobbing. But I wasn't there when he died. I was at my doctor's office, digesting the news that I, too, was going to be sick for the rest of my life. I dreamed about my dad that night. He was trapped in the hedge and screaming for help. I tried to show him the way out for what felt like hours, but I was invisible. He couldn't see me or hear me. As far as he knew, he was alone. Somehow, in that irrepressible logic of dreams, I knew it was my fault. I woke up crying. It was enough. I'd had enough. I'm not stupid or naive. Life is a tide. And the shitty truth is some of us live on a stormy coast. I knew this. But I wanted a break. Just a couple of hours where I didn't feel sad. So I went online, hoping to stumble on some kind of guided imagery technique or hypnotic ASMR. Something to create an artificially happy place, at least for a little while. I tried everything. Nothing worked. I kept searching anyway, trawling increasingly weird websites far into the night because the search itself was addicting. Not a happy place, but certainly a distracting one. Sometime in the middle of the 5th night, I found an ancient GeoCities page titled A Recipe for Happiness. I clicked, of course. Are you tired of feeling bad? Want to cheer up? Well, have I got good news for you. My friend gave me this recipe for happiness that works like a charm. There are 2 parts to the recipe. What followed was a pretty standard honey cake recipe, although the last instructions gave me pause. Mix the ingredients together in a glass bowl, then spit in the mixture. Cook at whatever temperature you want for exactly 20 minutes. Cut in half. Put half outside your door. Eat the other half during. Part 2. Take one happy memory and meditate. Think of someone who makes you happy. Plan a perfect day. Go to sleep thinking about your perfect day. Do this and your sorrow will be eaten away. It made me smile. Eating cake while meditating on happier times wasn't bad advice. So I give it a try. I even spit in the cake batter. I cut the cake and set half of it on the porch. Tendrils of steam twirled into the darkness, lit pale silver by the full moon. I curled up the couch to eat the remaining half. For my happy memory, I chose that first evening in the hollow, my little dog, lit to soft brilliance by the dying sun. As for someone who made me happy, I picked my dad. Then I planned a perfect day. Or rather, remembered it. I just started my first real job, and still lived with my parents. I'd had a good day at work. My dog met me in the driveway, prancing and wiggling like he hadn't seen me for years. Dad cooked an early dinner and told jokes while my mom played her guitar. It rained that night. We went out to the porch, watching palm trees sway as torrents poured down. My dog was scared, so I picked him up and held him as thunder roared. Afterward, we ate brownies and ice cream. Then I settled in for the night and read a book until I fell asleep, with my dog cured at my feet. As I drifted off, smiling at the memory, I swore I could feel him there, warm and surprisingly heavy, sprawling lazily over my toes. When I woke, that warm weight had shifted to my pillow. A terrible, painful hope coursed through me, one I couldn't even acknowledge. I opened my eyes. Something tiny lay on my pillow in a drying pool of blood. Fuzzy and weirdly dirty, exuding drifting grey filaments that sparkled in the sun. 3 milky eyes glinted over a horror show of a snout, cracked and bleeding, bursting with an improbable cluster of human molars. It blinked, each eye just slightly out of tandem, opening and closing with a soft, wet click, and smiled. Ropes of bloody drool leaked between its teeth. It placed 2 cold paws on my face. Then it lowered its mouth over my own and inhaled. Breath and blood and every organ in my body seemed to travel up my esophagus. Like God himself was sucking my guts through a straw. I whipped my head from side to side as the awful bottleneck sensation intensified. All my guts were coming up, and so were emotions, memories, half-forgotten nightmares. Painful images of my withered father. The last time I saw my mother, dressed for work and setting a bowl of oatmeal on the counter while driving rain fell. And my dog, my poor little dog, trying to run from the needle up until the very end. I screamed into the mouth of the monster. I expected it to fly off, but it inflated, a furry flesh balloon growing. Without warning, it let go. I stumbled back, gagging. The monster, an engorged orb the size of a German shepherd, simply smiled. Hazy morning light filtered through the window, bathing it in soft white. Rage inexplicably built in my chest, growing exponentially every second. It croaked, then burped. I wanted to kill it, to plunge my arms elbow deep into its disgusting, distended body. And are you sad? It asked. A storm of emotion, rage, disgust, contempt, even hilarity, roiled through me. Overwhelming, overpowering, and paralyzing. No. You have no sadness. It poked its belly with a ridiculously small hand. I have it. It took a long time, but I finally realized that this absurd abomination hadn't eaten my guts. It ate my feelings. No sadness. No pain. No more stinging memories. Rage and confusion, sure. But underneath that was a satisfied calm akin to bliss. I left it alone in my bedroom and went for a drive. When I came back, I asked, "What are you?" "A special treat," it answered. I decided I'd had a psychotic break, and voluntarily checked myself into a hospital. After 2 days of assessments, they found nothing wrong. Why would they? I was on an even keel, basking in a curiously blank inner peace. When I got home, the monster was in my bed. jolly, indecent roundness had withered to skeletal proportions. It looked awful. Stuffed. "I need," it gasped. "I need, or you will suffer again." The prospect of returning to a life of despair, of loss, was crushing. I couldn't even fathom how I'd survived it in the first, and felt I'd never be able to do it again. So I knelt by the bed and opened my mouth. The monster latched on and inhaled. The unpleasant bottleneck sensation returned, like my insides were crowding my windpipe. And with it, memories and feelings, the rage I'd experienced upon meeting the monster, contempt at its ugliness, the fear of insanity. And more, my dog, old and grey, waddling happily after me. My father in his hospital bed, smiling uncertainly as he said my name for the last night. And more, and more. I wrenched away, gasping. The monster smiled, fat and rotund again. Over the following days, we developed a routine. I went to work and attended doctor appointments, even visited friends. Then I came home and let the monster extract my negative feelings. Bad client at work? Removed and forgotten before the memory could sink in. Friend who wouldn't make eye contact? What did I care? My pet monster would take care of it like he took care of everything else. That's what it did, you see, removed the feelings, the vibrancy, the pain, from painful things. Over the course of several weeks, it removed everything. I knew, dimly, that I experienced awful things on a daily basis, but I didn't remember them. The monster removed triggers, too. Before the year was up, the sight of my dog's bed no longer made me cry. Photos of my parents held almost no interest. I flipped through them on a regular basis, skimming places and faces that had so recently crushed me. All the while, that peaceable bliss intensified. I flitted through life in a pleasant haze of calmness. My work life improved. My supervisor started talking about a promotion because I was so unflappable, so decisive. My friends were able to look at me again. And, for the first time in months, I was confident enough to reach out to them. One day as I drove home from work, I realized I hadn't looked at my photos in a very long time. It's not that I cared, exactly, but it was a deviation. Those things no longer caused me pain, and I had nothing better to do. So why not view them? I got home and obediently kneeled. The monster, now the size of a horse, twisted and bent like a mutated spider, fixed its mouth over mine. I'd come to enjoy the process. It was uncomfortable and unpleasant, but familiar. And afterward, I always felt happy, peaceful, empty, and warm. When it finished, I opened my mother's photo album and began to browse. After a while, I realized I didn't recognize anybody. I remembered remembering them. But I didn't remember them. The stout man with curly hair like mine, the athletic woman who smiled like me, and the numerous people who wove in and out of this photographic narrative, they all were strangers. I reached a picture of my 10-year-old self cuddling a ragged, homely chihuahua. Ghosts of memories tickled my brain, urging me to remember, urging me to know. And I understood, finally, that I had lost something. I don't know why I cared. I felt so happy. Peaceful. My life was painless. I was great. But I was also selfish. And I didn't like the idea that the monster had taken so much. Where was the line between happiness and emptiness? I didn't want to be empty. I wanted to be full. So, after many days of deliberation, I decided to make a change. I called off work, cancelled much-needed doctor appointments, and settled in to search online. What are you doing? The monster asked, looking up some special recipes. I said with a bland smile. It took 7 days, but I found the original recipe. At the bottom of the page was another entry. A recipe for sadness. Underneath were the words. If you're really dumb, you can undo happiness equals you shouldn't, but it's up to you. So here. Mix cake batter following the instructions above. Cut your hand and drip your blood into the batter. Cook the cake as instructed above. Cut the cake in half. Give half to your happiness, and eat the other half. Now here's the sad part. Remember the happy memory you meditated on. Remember the person who made you happy. Remember your perfect day. Choose one to forget, or choose to never be happy again. Or better yet, Don't kill your happiness in the first place. I agonized for days. My monster, my happiness, my joy, continued to drain my pain, uncertainty, and fear. He quickly grew to 3 times his size. Finally, I made my decision. It would be better to live in pain forever than to forget my father, my mother, or my dog. So I followed the recipe: sweet honey cake, poisoned with blood instead of saliva. Then I cut it in half and brought it to my monster. I expected something awful. A fight that left my bloody shreds ground into the carpet. But the monster only smiled. Round, flat eyes the size of dinner plates fixed on the blood cake. "What is that? A special recipe?" I gulped, but the beast was so focused on the cake that it didn't notice. "Just for you. Thank you." It opened its mouth. I placed the cake delicately on its tongue. It chewed eagerly, and shrank. Fat, firm sides caved, ragged rolls of empty flesh falling against its bones. Pain built in my guts and chest, roiling and fluttering. Shivers racked my spine. My warm, even-keeled peace shrank along with the monster that had granted it, leaving cold desolation in its place. By the time the monster shriveled into a flat, boneless mass of dusty fur, I was prostrate on the floor, sobbing. Memories flooded back, pummeling me, leaving me breathless with pain. They pressed against me and threatened to explode out of me, pinning me in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't even dream of moving. I could only lay there and hurt. After my dad died, someone told me that pain is a fugue. It'll break apart eventually, giving way to happiness again the way a nightmare opens to the morning. But my experience is opposite. There is no fugue. Sorrow is sharp, it is devastating, it is painfully present, and sometimes there's no way out. The recipe writer was right. I suffer every day, more than I did before. Like the universe is punishing me for those few months of stolen peace. It's bad. So bad that sometimes I think I made the wrong choice. But then I remember my dad. I remember my mom. I remember our perfect day filled with songs and bad jokes and warm, driving rain. I remember my dog, nestled in warm, coppery shadows. And even though I hurt, I am okay. Story 2, How many roads must a man walk before you can call him a monster? My dad was a good man. Honest and hard-working, the kind of man who meant his handshake as a binding agreement and put his only daughter before all else, even himself. Dad worked as a truckie, carrying loads all over Australia. I never knew my mum and I never had any other siblings or family. It was just me, Dad and his beloved truck. We never had a house or anything, at least not that I could remember. When I got old enough to ask why, Dad said we used to, but he had to sell it so that he could afford to look after me. It didn't matter to a 6-year-old kid. The cab of a semi was just as good as a house, especially when I could fall asleep in one place and wake up in another. Every day brought new adventures and new places to explore. Dad would take me out for lunch and ice cream, and we'd check out whatever town we'd landed in before dinner and, for me, bed. Dad did a lot of his driving at night. Sometimes, when we didn't have a load, we'd spend a few days in one place, maybe even get a motel room. Just another adventure. We'd eat and watch TV, and then he'd put me down in my own big bed, a real treat. Sometimes I'd wake up and he'd be gone, but I never worried. He always came back. If I was the most important thing in Dad's world, his truck came a close second. It was home and work, a place to live and his main source of income. He treated that old truck like a second child, meticulous in his maintenance and careful not to push it too hard. The cab was always spotless, except for a funny little man made out of sticks and vines that Dad had stuck to the dashboard. "That's my God," he said. "A God just for me. Everything we have is thanks to him." I'd heard about gods, of course, but normally in the Christian sense. The idea of a personal God fascinated me, something Dad clearly enjoyed. When you're old enough, you'll find out all about him, love. He'll look after you even better than the way he's always looked after me. But you just focus on being a kid for now because, before you know it, that'll all be over. I didn't have to know anything else to believe in Dad's God. At that age, the fact that he said so was enough for me. Of course, I never expected to see God with my own eyes. One night, way out in the middle of the Nullarbor, we'd parked up to rest. There's next to nothing out there, and it was one of the few places Dad used to drive during the day and sleep at night. Sleep wouldn't come to me though, no matter how hard I tried. I felt hot and bothered, like I might be getting sick. Whatever the reason, it meant that I heard Dad sneaking out of the cab in the middle of the night. At first I thought he must have slipped out to go to the toilet, but as more time passed I started to worry. Why would he be outside for so long in the dark? My fear only deepened when I heard the sound of chanting, muffled and gruff. I decided I needed to see what was making the commotion, and what had happened to Dad. I could hear more clearly from the front of the cab, enough to know that the voice chanting softly out in the dark desert belonged to my dad. For some reason that didn't calm me the way I thought it should. I could barely see out of the cab in the inky, moonless darkness, and that didn't help my anxiety at all. Suddenly a green light flared and I instinctively ducked down in the truck. When I finally found the courage to poke my head up again, I saw something that took my young breath away. Dad sat, cross-legged, on the desert sand, wearing an odd cloak that I'd never seen before. In front of him stood the source of the light, his God, it had to be. It stood tall, and I could see the resemblance to the simple effigy on the dashboard. The long spindly arms, the antlers, and the vines coiling around its form. Somehow, though, this realization did nothing to alleviate my fear. I quickly returned to the bed at the back of the cab, burrowing deep under the covers and squeezing my eyes shut. I must have fallen asleep before Dad came back, and I never mentioned anything to him about what I had seen. In truth, I never got the chance. As we entered South Australia, there was an eruption of sound and light and we were suddenly surrounded by police cars. It all happened so fast. A kind-faced female officer gave me a lollipop and held me tight as they dragged my dad violently into a paddy wagon. I never saw him again. I learned very quickly that Dad must be more than I ever thought he was. Within days I found out that the name I knew him by, the name all his friends on the road knew him by, was fake. I knew that he had done something bad, but I was so little that no one would talk to me about it. I was put into foster care in Adelaide, and although the people were nice, they were distant and refused to even mention my dad. I made a few friends, and I grew up, but it never felt real. I prayed to God, the popular one and the one from the desert, but I never got an answer. I hated my new life, and I missed my dad. It wasn't until my 20s that I really thought to try and contact my dad again. Even in adulthood, though, no one would talk to me about it. I mean, I really only had a handful of foster parents and grandparents to go to, but still. They'd skirt around the issue, tell me I didn't need to revisit that nasty business. But I did. He was my dad, after all. I eventually decided I'd have to do the research myself. I didn't have much to go off, but I knew at least one of his names and I had to start somewhere. The internet turned up nothing useful, which was a blow. But I remembered that the State Library held a huge collection of backdated newspaper articles, so I made that my next target. I knew, obviously, when I had gone into foster care, so I knew roughly when to look. Unfortunately none of the articles had been digitized yet, so I had to search through on an old machine and drag up each front page individually. The process was time-consuming and I must have sat there for hours, to the point that I nearly gave up in frustration. I honestly wish I had the face of evil, child killer smiles as Judge reads charges. What? It couldn't be. But it was. Right there on the front page, grainy but unmistakable, I saw my dad again. I felt sick and angry, sure that there must have been some mistake. My kindly old dad wouldn't have hurt a fly, much less a child. The nausea only got worse and my heart sank as I read the rest of the story. I must have churned through a month's worth of front-page news over the rest of the afternoon. Each story filled me with a heaviness, my belief that the man I knew as Dad had to be innocent fading into a sick rage until I could take no more, retching uncontrollably into the bin at the desk next to me. It was all true. For fuck's sake, he wasn't even my dad. He had taken me, it turned out, from a single mother in Grafton as a 2-year-old. Her body turned up several months after we were reported missing. I wasn't the first, either. He'd always seemed older, to me, but I had no idea he'd been nearing 65 when they finally caught him. All told, 8 children fell victim to the man who called himself my dad. He would murder the mother and abduct her child, always at around 2 years old, and always a girl. He would then go on the road, raising the girl as his own, using the transient lifestyle he led to stay hidden. This was well before the internet, in the days when no one questioned a working-class man having to take his kid on the road. Then, at the age of 8, he would, for fuck's sake, I still can't even say it without wanting to throw up. At the age of 8, he murdered those poor kids, and started the whole cycle again. The worst was yet to come, though. I realized, reading one of the later articles, what his reasons were. The papers portrayed this monster I'd called Dad as crazy, committing his crimes as part of a deranged series of pseudo-satanic rituals. They said he was criminally insane, that he'd had schizophrenia, all sorts of things. I've seen the entity he called God. I don't know who or what it is, or what it did for him, and I never want to. I know it exists, and I know he wasn't some sick person killing to appease the monsters in his head. The truth is far worse, and far more terrifying. We were sacrifices, to a very real entity, made by a person who knew exactly what he was doing. To call him crazy diminishes the evil he perpetrated. We were sacrifices, killed for nothing more than to appease some godforsaken entity and make his own life marginally better. 17 lives, mother and child, for the sake of one. I'd been so close to being number 18. He died in prison before my 16th birthday. My dad was a good man. I just wish I'd never known the monster behind the facade. Story 3, there is someone behind me. Is your roommate in town? My sister asked me while we were Skyping one day. I simply shook my head no, without taking my eyes from the nail I was trying to paint blood red. So, who's that behind you? In the balcony? That was the phrase that, 1 month ago, started my whole nightmare. Annie had the unfortunate habit of always trying to scare me, so even though she swore to me she was telling the truth, I dismissed her. Maybe if I didn't things wouldn't be this bad now. I went on living my life, and a few days later had already forgotten her words. That was until I got on the subway after a night out with my friends at a crowded pub downtown. My apartment was just 2 blocks after one of the last stops, so I was left alone for most of the way. To avoid a group of drunk guys in the middle of the car, I decided to sit on the far right end where I could stay secluded and also make a quick getaway if needed. In the interest of avoiding them altogether, I turned towards the window beside me. I could still see their reflections, but I was far enough that they wouldn't be able to notice me staring. I still had to keep an eye on them, just to be safe. As I watched them from my seat, I noticed someone sitting on the other end of the car, just a few rows behind the guys. I found it strange, because I couldn't quite see who it was. Like the image of the person was somehow blurred or foggy from the window. But I could see the guys just fine. The blurred figure didn't move even when one of the guys got up and began attempting some sort of breakdance as the other one made a poor impression of beatboxing. I couldn't see his, or her, face, but still I felt like it was watching me. The figure just stood there, immobile, like it was waiting for something. When my stop came I rushed out of there, not wanting to call anyone's attention. But just as the train was about to leave, and I felt somewhat safe, I sneaked a peek at the mysterious dark figure just to find the seat where it was supposed to be completely empty. There was no one else's in the platform as well. I was completely alone. I convinced myself that the other person had just left the car without me realizing, and made my way home. But no amount of convincing and rationalizing could change what I know now. Just 2 days after that I was window shopping some boutiques with my roommate Laura, when a spectacular pair of Louboutins caught my attention. As I watched the shoes I noticed a figure standing in the other side of the street. I knew immediately what it was. I took a deep breath and looked behind me. Nothing. No one was there aside from an old lady and a group of tourists fully equipped with cameras. I looked back at the window and saw it again. Except This time it was closer. Already out of the sidewalk and on the edge of the street. I asked Laura if she could see it too, but she didn't know what I was talking about. I panicked and ran out of there, leaving her behind. The few times I accidentally glanced at the windows, the figure was always there, waiting. In the elevator I get in with my eyes closed and ask the person by my side to press the button from my floor, and let me know when we arrive. I don't know if they think I'm weird and I don't care. On the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the large mirror in the end of the hallway of every floor, and how I always liked to take selfies in front of it. The lighting was always on point. I make my way towards my front door with my eyes glued to my feet. I won't look up. I won't look up. But just as I open the door, my curiosity gets the best of me and I look at the mirror. In the end of the hallway I see someone, a woman. I can see it properly now. She's wearing a long black vest and her skin is almost as white as her hair. Her face is tilted to the left, making it look like her neck is broken or simply just crooked. Either way, the sight is disturbing. I want to close my eyes, but I can't stop staring at her. Why can't I stop? She takes one long step towards me, and then two more. 4 steps and I can see her eyes now, black and lifeless. She's staring right inside my eyes. I can't even blink. 5 steps, and I see the tip of her bare feet from under the vest. The nails are long and chapped. I think I'm going to pass out. 6, and the corners of her mouth for a small grin. She's close. So close. 7. And the elevator door opens and Laura calls out to me. I look at the woman one last time before getting inside the apartment and running towards my room. My roommate thinks I should seek help, that I'm sick and seeing things that aren't there. The thing she doesn't understand is, that the more I talk about her the more I felt compelled to look in the mirror. Just to see if it's truth. Just to see if she's really there. Laura doesn't understand. No, talking about it won't do me any good. I threw my standing mirror in the garbage bin downstairs, and also broke the ones from my bathroom. I'm safe inside my room. I won't see her. I can't see her. Reflective surfaces are also a possible danger, so I avoid those ones too. Every CD, hard plastic or shining object went to the trash as well. I won't see her. She won't find me. When Laura refused to get rid of her mirrors, I simply stopped getting out of my room altogether. The temptation is too much for me. As a last resort I covered my windows with dark paint, to remove any kind of glare, and with it, reflection. My sister's been calling me non-stop for the past few days, but I can't afford to talk about the woman, so I never answer. I spend my days locked inside my room, in the dark. Every now and then I felt the urge to look myself in the mirror, just to prove that I'm crazy. There is no one behind me. There is no one behind me. This whole thing is something that I made up in my head, and I don't have to be afraid. Laura knocks at my door every day and asks me if she can do something to help, but I don't have the strength to talk anymore. It's all pointless. I know better than that now. There is someone behind me. And if I look, I know she will be there. Waiting. Story 4, I lost my son at daycare. I had been searching for daycares for what seemed like forever. My little one was about to turn 4 and I knew he needed to start socializing and learn how to behave in a classroom. My little man and I were inseparable and I never spent a night without him since he was born. You could say I am a helicopter mom, but the day he was born, so was my best friend. I was dreading this. Dreading dropping him off with strangers. Dreading being apart. I had found the right daycare during one of my typical outings with the little man. We spent the day at the park and he played with Lab that one of our neighbors owned. He loved that dog. We then went to go get chicken nuggets, against my better judgment as I always try to get him to eat his veggies. On our way home and the little guy passed out from a nugget coma, I stumbled upon a brand new daycare. It looked pristine and bright from the outside. Little Memories it was called. I went home and ferociously Googled the reviews and the staff, the menu, the street in front, the neighborhood behind it, and anything else within a 50-mile radius. Besides the stellar reviews and recommendations was the ability to watch your little one via camera on your laptop or phone. This was perfect for me, since I was so scared to let him go, and this would allow me to keep an extra eye on him. The days leading up, I made sure it was filled with the things he loved the most. Playtime with our neighbor's lab, seeing the old steam train near our home, playing Minecraft, and chicken nuggets. After dropping him off the first day, that had a lot of tears being held back, things seemed great. He was making friends and listening to the teacher, and having fun. I rushed home and watched him on the app right away and saw him playing with friends and laughing. I edited my photos for work while watching him play, and although I missed him, he seemed happy. Until the second day. I had dropped him off and things seemed fine. He was eager to get inside and see his friends. I gave him Big Mom Bear hugs and he was escorted inside. I picked up some coffee and made my way home. I started editing photos and opened the video app. And then I noticed something odd. The kids were all in a circle, doing a weird dance. They walked in a large circle and raised their hands in the air over and over again. My little one was in the center, he wasn't moving. He had a cold blank stare, almost as if he was looking into the camera. I picked up my phone to call the daycare, and as soon as it started to ring, he dropped to the ground and the kids ran to the side of the room scared. I ran out of my house still on the phone, screaming to have them look at my son. In tears I sped to the school, getting to him as quickly as possible. So many things rushing in my head. Was he sick? Did he faint? Did he have some kind of illness? The secretary was trying to calm me down and was asking security questions, and I couldn't stop crying. I finally got to the daycare and the secretary was waiting out front. Mascara running down my face, I held out my ID and asked to see my son. And she held my shoulders and said he was fine. I demanded to see him. I walked into the corridor and they went to the back room and brought him out. He looked fine. Confused but fine. I held him close and asked him if he was okay. After some comments about being a first-timer and leaving your kid for the first time, and a slew of my questions regarding the food he ate and what had happened, we packed up and went home. On the way home I asked him through the rear-view mirror if he was feeling okay and if he remembered falling. He didn't answer my questions, and looked out the window. I made an appointment to a clinic and got him checked by the doctor the next morning. Everything was fine. The doctor said some kids tend to act out or exhibit different behaviors in new situations. I decided to bring him to the park and play with his friend. I knew that would get him back to normal. He walked to the middle of the park and the lap started to run towards him with his ball to play. As the dog got close, my son turned his head and glared at the dog froze and then retreated. I got in the car with him confused. Maybe the steam train would make him feel better. As I drove by he didn't turn his head to look, just started forward with a glaze over his eyes. I had asked my husband to pick up some nuggets and have a night together. We sat him down at the table and he didn't touch his food. We both asked him if he was okay and what was wrong. He pushed his plate away and turned his head away. I was scared. What did I do? Was he mad at me for leaving him there? Did they do something to him? Was he sick and the doctors missed it? I tucked him into bed and gave him a kiss. He turned away and stared at the wall. I then said to him, "Hey, what happened to my little guy?" He turned around and looked me dead in the eyes and said, "He's lost, but I'm here now. What? Don't worry, I'll be just as good." As he turned away to his original position, I saw a mark on his neck, Roman numerals, 4, burned into his skin. Today he went back. I'm sitting here unable to do my work, and I haven't been able to turn the video on. I'm terrified. Terrified he will be looking back, with those unfamiliar eyes. Story 5, treat the disease, not the symptoms. I don't want to open my eyes, why can't I just sleep forever? Some people say getting out of bed in the morning is so hard, but how about for the few of us who haven't even opened our eyes yet and are already struggling? I take a deep sigh and slowly open my eyes. The alarm has been going off for what seems like an eternity. The constant sound swirls and entwines with the thousand thoughts already laying siege to the inside of my head. I let one leg drop to the floor and let the momentum pull the other by its side. This has become my daily routine at 4 a.m. With another sigh I lean forward and leave the safety of the bed, the warm inviting solitary island left behind. I already yearn to be back inside. Walking across the room I don't bother turning the light on, knowing my fragile eyesight couldn't withstand the onslaught light switches inflict upon me at this hour. I can already feel the long dark fingernails creeping over my shoulder blades and down to my chest, almost stopping me from taking another step. I push on, but the corrupted hands are so strong, pressed against my chest, pulling me back towards the bed, towards safety. I push on. I lean against the doorframe of my bedroom. I can see the bathroom across the hall. Why is it always this hard, every morning? Why? The bathroom light is already on, like a beacon in the night, a safe space for all weary travelers. And I'm so tired. As I make my way towards the bathroom, the long dark fingernails creep around my ankles, and over my shoulders, around my waist, trying to pull me back to the bedroom, trying to delay my journey, ushering me anywhere but the bathroom. I just want to sleep. I make my way into the bathroom. The solitary light above the sink mirror casts a shadow across my gaunt face. The dark figure behind me likes me skinny. He likes being able to wrap his long dark fingernails around my frail body. My eyes look sunken like lowered coffins. My lips betray my mouth that hasn't eaten in days. Running my hand through my brittle hair, pushing it to the side, I open the medicine cabinet hidden behind the mirror. Clutching the bottle contained within, I close the mirror again. The dark figure is right behind me now. He raises his hands to my throat from behind, fingers tightening around my windpipe. I grab a cup from the side and turn the cold tap on. The cold water splashes up from the sink, spots hit my t-shirt. No matter how tight I feel his hands, I swallow the water with a few tablets taken from the container. I don't even look at the bottle anymore. I figure all the pills I keep are there for some reason, so I take a handful at a time. Each time the dark figure beckons me back to the bed. Some days I'll take the right pill and the dark figure will be gone till the following night. Other days I'll spend the entire day with the dark figure hugging the porcelain bowl while he explains to me in great detail why no one is here looking after me. The dark figure looks concerned, which I haven't seen on his face before. I look to my hand that held the tablets, only one left. I notice and smile. Like all parasites, when the host shows signs of terminating themselves, they flee the sinking ship. But when you are so ingrained into someone's life, someone's mind and part of who they are, they become part of the final show. I'd picked up the sleeping tablets, prescribed to me months ago when I couldn't sleep, before I was diagnosed with depression, and unlike the recommended dose of 1 tablet after a meal, I had taken, I assume, in the region of 9 tablets. The dark figure wrapped his talons around my wrist and urged me to get my phone, to call for help, but my eyes were getting heavy and I could swear from here my bedroom was miles away. I could barely lift my foot as I trudged towards my bedroom, like walking in quicksand. Each step became a chore in itself. I fell to my knees. I'm so tired. Standing in front of me, the dark figure, instead of pressing down on me, keeps me where I am. He kneels below me, in a one last ditch attempt at lifting me up, to keep my head up and soldier on, but it was my turn to refuse. I land face down in the hallway between the light of the bathroom and the shadowy safety of my bedroom. I can't see the dark figure anymore. I can't remember the last time I was awake and couldn't see him or feel him close by at least. Finally, I think I can get some sleep. Him so, tire. Story 6, my high school boyfriend texted me. Kevin and I used to split my Xanax and watch the water in the Arkansas River move so slow the mosquitoes treated it as stagnant. My Oldsmobile saw a lot of action, be it street races or intimacy, lost races, lost innocence. This was back in 2004 and 2005. I told everyone he probably ran away when we broke up. It didn't help the guilt that people blamed me, but I lied too. Something happened to him. I parked off Memorial Drive, right next to Washington Irving Park, under that rusty forgotten underpass on the beach like usual. It was around 11:30 p.m. and Mariah Carey's We Belong Together was playing on the radio. Our relationship was teetering on an edge, and it couldn't have made me feel worse for being one step away from what I ended up doing. We got in a fight when he demanded a shan, the first thing he did the entire night. We didn't talk like we used to, he just got high off of my meds or tried to get head. He tried to guilt-trip me with some bland rhetoric and I said again, no. I feel bad to say it considering his fate, but he was kind of a prick that wouldn't tell me the most basic of things. And that's what I told him, waving my hands and pointing fingers. He recoiled his small chin into his long neck and pursed his lips. His dull eyes stared blankly. He hardly seemed to care, like always. Get out of my car. I huffed, a vague sense of guilt entering through my stomach. I wanted to be steadfast, no more wasted time on this one-sided boy. I gave him one more chance that night, and wasn't going to rethink it. Bitch. He grumbled on his way out, forgetting his Motorola Razr in between the seat and the back cushion. He paced outside and I failed to notice the phone as I locked the doors. I slumped over, now what? Time to leave. I flipped my headlights on, intending to do a U-turn out of the situation. But when the lights came on, illuminating the dirt road ahead, the outline of a horse and rider stood on the edges of darkness. It stepped forward, its natural shape perverting with every step. It was no horse, it was hooves, hair, and teeth, stacked together in the shape of a horse and rider, shifting on a gu underneath. My skin prickling, my eyes looked to the shape of a rider despite everything in me that told them not to. Its head, what was disguised as a head, was a massive eye. Like an ant's, with an uncountable amount of lenses that were windows into another world when the light hit them. Or rather, it hit the light, harsh and prohibited nature. Kevin slapped the door and pulled on the handle, screaming for me. I could hardly hear him, something in me wouldn't process it. Shoo? Shoo? It started to speak into my brain with a flurry of alien words that felt like drinking grease. It called to me, compelling me to nurture it. It wanted me to take it to its dad. A horse. The eye detached from the hair tangled into a neck and rolled, yes, rolled, down the back, made of hooves and teeth, moving all the way to the horse's head, pushing back the parts that covered its soft, wet underlayer. It stared at me. I stared back, testing my will against its own. No. I imposed, ignoring the vivid imagery of it smashing into my car and crushing me, or moving its solid parts to drown me in the living, black and dark green glue underneath. Kevin started pounding the window, probably trying to break it, quickly looking between the car and the beast. He kept screaming my name, yelling about his phone. His phone. His phone was the least of my worries in the heat of the moment. If I had the time or headspace to think, he'd still be around. But I froze, and he ran when the beast got too close. With each breath its entire body shriveled and expanded. No. I said no. I repeated in my head, over and over, trying to build a brick wall around my mind. It leapt into the air, bouncing off of the front of my car, leaving only a small dent and a drop of the globule substance under its surface, leaking from a point under its belly where an extremely primitive-looking hatchet protruded. It sank and rose into its body with each breath. Writing this, I was about to mention it chased him, but really, I don't know where it or he went. I slammed my gas and didn't look back. He cried as he ran, though. I really failed him, just as a human, and I feel awful for it every day. I'm not so high I can't remember. I kept his phone. It got a lot of calls from people I recognized, but each night around 11:30 for 7 nights in a row it got a call from an unknown number. The number was different each time, but I only answered once. Nothing but the many sounds of a horse or several came from the other side. So what spurred me to write this is that I got a text from Kevin's long deactivated number, somehow. I stood in the middle of the frozen food aisle shopping for my 1-year-old. I was already shaking from the cool freezers, but I went sub-zero when I looked at my phone. Why are you ghosting me? Story 7, The Camper. Type in the login. Type in the password. Fuck. The account balance and the Number of days till university scholarship was supposed to start indicated that either I'll find a job, or I'll be forced to go on a strict diet. Knowing how awesome my soft skills are, I outright rejected any jobs that would require me to deal with people. Sadly, that also meant rejecting most of positions open for students on summer break. Regular job boards did not contain anything viable, so I was forced to stare into the abyss of local Craigslist. Clone. All postings there fell into one of the three categories. What a dumb scam. This scam is actually pretty clever and it's just sketchy, so maybe. One of the least sketchy jobs involved towing a camper trailer to a village in the mountains, around one day of driving away. I already wanted to go hiking in the area, so I quickly rang the number and arranged picking up the trailer next morning. The old lady on the other side surprised me by accepting my first quote, covering both the fuel and my expenses till the end of the summer break. Next morning I found myself drinking tea with the same delightful lady. Listening to the story of the camper was apparently also a part of this job, but for the sum of money she was paying I was happy to do that as well. Mr. Zwodzki, her husband, bought the trailer just after retiring, but did not have the opportunity to use it even once. Heart attack killed him a week before first planned trip. The house of Mrs. Zwodzki was still full of photos of her deceased husband. Here they were, looking vintage, in front of pyramids of Giza. On the opposite wall, a photo of the same happy marriage on a yacht in the middle of some lake. When Mrs. Zwodzki counted the money for me, I noticed that she also carried his photo in her wallet. Even weirder, the photo from the wallet showed young Mr. Zwodzki in color, which meant that she must have hired someone to digitally retouch it, because color photography was very rare in the times of their youth. My job was to deliver the trailer to the sister of Mrs. Zwodzki, Mrs. Novak, who owned some land in the mountains. She needed the trailer to serve as a shelter for shepherds, taking care of the sheep grazing in a remote part of her property. Money in hand, I attached the trailer to my old VW-T4 and slowly started towing it towards the destination. I spent the uneventful part of the journey between Mrs. Zwodzki house and the foot of the mountains listening to radio and daydreaming about owning one of the countless cars that passed me on the highway. It was mid-September, so the heat was bearable even without climate control, while the sky was blue, without even a single cloud on it. The sight of the mountains, majestically emerging from the horizon, made me forget about my tight budget, dodgy dorms and 3 more years of this shit till I finish my degree. Right then the problems did not matter. After finishing this job I would spend few days in this beautiful place. I left the highway and entered the wooded hills. With no other cars on the road, the drive was pleasant and I had the time to admire the scenery. Then, the engine coughed. You piece of junk. It coughed again, this time twice. In quick succession. Fuck. Not here. Not now. But it died exactly then and there. After calling my car all sorts of names, inevitably I reached conclusion that it was not entirely its fault. Fuel tank indicator was broken, but over the years, I learned to estimate gas consumption pretty well and I have never ran out of fuel before. But also never before have I been towing something as heavy as that camper trailer. In the middle of nowhere I could not count on someone stopping by and selling me a bit of gas, so embarrassed I took out my phone and dialed the Mrs. Novak number. A man, husband of Mrs. Novak, answered the phone. I was afraid that he would make a fuss about a delay in delivery, but he just laughed it off and offered to rescue me with a jerry can of fuel. The catch was that he was visiting his neighbor and has already drunk a bit too much to drive, so I'd have to wait till morning. That night was both the most beautiful and most horrifying night of my life. Far from city lights, I could see millions of stars shining with their cold light, in some cases emitted thousands of years ago. Such view of the vastness of space really gives you a healthy perspective on how insignificant both you And your problems really are. Wind, howling between the tops of the trees, carried the scent of the forest, and I felt like I was the first human to ever walk through this valley. Because of the cold, standing outside and admiring the nature quickly became uncomfortable. I decided to take the advantage of bits of civilization I brought here with me, and spend the night in my sleeping bag in the back of T4. Weariness caught up with me when I zipped the sleeping bag, and in no time I fell asleep. At 2 a.m. I woke up with an overpowering feeling that something was wrong. I was too afraid to move. My heart was racing and my breath became shallow. Instincts took over, and at that moment I was just a caveman hiding from a prehistoric beast. Minutes later I heard banging from the direction of the trailer. It sounded like something was desperately trying to open the door. I was terrified. Whatever was trying to get inside had a lot of strength, because I felt my car rocking while it was struggling with the door. Banging stopped, so the camper door must have given way to whatever was trying to get inside. Shit, now they'll want me to cover the costs of this mess. That thought brought me back from prehistory to the reality of 21st century. I was in a wooded, sparsely populated mountainous area, where bears were not uncommon, so most likely one of them smelled something interesting inside the camper and got inside to check it out. I was happy that I decided to spend the night in the back of my car instead of under a tent. Even though inside the metal box I was safe from the animal, I still trembled in fear and did not dare to move. There were few more noises from the camper, and after what felt like eternity the night became silent again. I don't even know when I drifted off. The night was beautiful, but the morning was simply stunning. Cloudless blue sky above lush, green mountains was a good change from the city landscape I watched every day. I went to inspect the vandalized trailer. The destruction was not as bad as it sounded the night before. The latch on the door was torn off and that was just about it. I peeked inside the trailer, but withdrew immediately in disgust. It smelled just like a public toilet on a music festival. Not in the mood to explain last night's events to Mr. Novak, I closed the trailer door and replaced the latch with a piece of wire from the toolbox I had inside T4. The rest of the trip went smoothly. Mr. Novak came with fuel and insisted not to accept money for it. He attached the trailer to the back of his car, shook my hand and drove last few kilometers home. My job was done, so I drove to the trailhead and spent next few days hiking. I don't own a TV, so when visiting family I usually catch up with what's new in mass entertainment. A month later, while watching a real crime show with my father, finally something clicked in my brain. I understood exactly what happened in those mountains, and the conclusion was horrifying. The presenter of 112 show went through the list of topics for the day. Robbery in a jewelry store, kidnapping of a businessman's wife, a couple killed while hiking, and a psycho who broke out of asylum and remains at large. The couple in the mountains was killed 2 weeks before, in the exact area I hiked to. They were found badly disfigured. Clearly, it was done not for any valuables the couple might have had, but rather for sake of murder itself. Strangely, most of the camping equipment was missing from their camp, so the killer must have taken it as a trophy. Public opinion fell into hysteria, because that murder resembled a series of murders committed years ago by a psycho, who broke out of the asylum just weeks before it happened. When the speaker pronounced the surname of the killer, my world imploded. His surname was Zawadzki. The picture inside Mrs. Zawadzki's wallet was not a restored photo of her husband. It must have been a fairly recent photo of her son, the same photo I was seeing on the TV screen at that moment. Unknowingly, I transported him inside that camper from the city to the remote area where his mother and aunt arranged a place for him to hide. The plan was foiled by my fuel miscalculation. Zawadzki must have gotten impatient, broke out of the trailer and was now roaming free, not supervised even by his family. The sounds at night were not a beast trying to get in, but a monster trying to get out. Story 8, The Monster. The following story is based on a real experience I had as a kid. I loved going to my grandpa's house as a kid. He was so nice to me and I liked to explore the house because I thought it was so cool. However, there was one room in his house where I wasn't allowed to go, the basement. I never found out why I wasn't allowed to go down there, until one day. The particular day was when my uncle came to the house. I had a good time talking and playing with him because he hardly visited me. Later, he asked me if I wanted to go into the basement since Grandpa was taking a nap. I was so excited to see what was in the basement. I went down the stairs with my uncle. I could see the basement from where I was. It looked shadowy. There appeared to be no lights down there. When I was finally in the basement, I actually got creeped out. It was pretty dark and creepy down there. My uncle showed me around. He showed me a work desk, an old computer and a bookshelf with many old books. I was a little disappointed by the lack of cool things in there. But, I noticed a doorway with only hinges attached to it. I asked my uncle if I could go into that room. He responded with "No, you can't, that's where the monster lives." I was surprised to hear this. I was one of those kids who didn't believe that type of stuff. As nervous as I was, I told my uncle that I didn't believe that there was a monster in there. He picked up a broom off the floor to show me that there's a monster there. He banged the broom on both sides of the doorway. All of a sudden, something yanked the broom out of his hand. I took a few steps back. I heard the broom being torn apart. I was about to cry out of fear. I heard a strange growling sound. A tear rolled down my cheek. "Run up the stairs. Get out of here," my uncle yelled before running away. I was alone in the basement with this creature. I didn't know what to do. I was just frozen in fear. I heard the growling again, and saw a hand grab the edge of the doorway. This was no ordinary human hand, it looked like it was made out of branches. I knew that the thing, I just don't know what to call it, would get me if I waited longer. So I ran up the stairs as fast as I could and slammed the door behind me. After searching the house, I found my uncle, who was being yelled at by my mom and grandpa. After my uncle was forced to leave for the day, I asked my grandpa about the monster. He only told me that it can't hurt me unless I go into the basement. I tried to ask him how the monster got there and what it was. He just told me that I would find the answers to all those questions when I was older. He was right, I did. To be continued. Story 9, My Overseas Tales. My stories are pretty simple. While deployed, I saw multiple ghosts. One encounter may have been a jinn. This is my first encounter. I was deployed to Al Udeid Air Base twice, once for 6 months then for a year. This story occurred in 2014. My first encounter was on the first of my deployments. I was on guard duty in what was essentially a wooden shack with an air conditioner and electrical outlet. On a Friday night I met a man who would live with me until this day. I was dropped off halfway through my shift at the East Gate shack. After checking that the light all, a gas-powered light system, was all good, I made my way into the shack. The floorboards creaked underneath me as I began to hook up my laptop. After settling in and I began to re-watch a season of Breaking Bad. A fourth of my way through an episode the light all started to flicker and ultimately went out. As I paused my show I cursed Air Force technology. I stood up to either fix the lights or call my control for further instructions. When I made it out to the machine, it kicked back on into life with only 2 out of 4 lights working. Not thinking anything of it, I went back into my shack and adjusted my laptop to let me see the only road leading towards the shack. Glancing up after seeing Walter throw a pizza onto the roof of his house, I noticed someone moving towards me down the road. It was a man, seeming to limp up the road towards area I was guarding. Finally giving him my full attention, I closed my laptop and attached the handheld radio to my belt. I stood up, adjusted my blouse and security badge so that it was in full view. I pulled open the crooked door. Moving towards the gate, I couldn't be sure who he was, as he appeared to have the lower half of his face covered with a cloth and no recognizable military uniform. I became nervous when I saw in his hand was what appeared to be a large handgun. Okay, I need to be calm, I thought as I unclipped my handheld radio and brought it closer to me. He's probably a TCN that must have gotten lost, and separated from his handlers. As he stood there, watching me, I asked, "Can I help you tonight, sir?" The man looked at me with confusion with his dark eyes. He shrugged in a way that his shoulders seemed to reach above his head. The man continued forward towards the gate. Again I addressed him in a much more serious tone. "Sir, this is a restricted area. If you don't show me proper ID, I will have to call security forces to come and apprehend you." My finger was hovering over the key on the radio that would alert my control section to send a unit to my location. As he moved closer, his head moved jaggedly backwards and forwards at an awful angle. It made a sickening wet crunching sound. That sound only made me damn my command more for not giving me a rifle for this guard duty. The man continued to move towards the gate and grabbed a hold of the chain link fence. That's when I noticed him in detail. He was a man that looked of Indian descent. He wore a ragged long-sleeved shirt and a hard hat. His mouth and nose were covered up by a handkerchief. The item in his hand wasn't a gun but rather an electric drill. As he began to shake the fence, I saw that his hard hat had a large crack running from back to front. A dark liquid seeped from his forehead onto the rest of his face. It seemed to collect in his mask. Following the blood-like liquid, I noticed his eyes weren't dark, they just weren't there at all. I stood in awe of his features. I looked down and saw that he wasn't standing, he had not legs or feet. Seeing this seemed to break me out of my trace and I keyed my radio. "Control, this is Eastgate. I seemed to have lost my keys. Copy that, Eastgate. We'll have someone out shortly." This of course was my duress code, signaling that I needed help as soon as possible. I still remember the entity's reaction to this day. He shook the gate and gave out an unholy scream. He cocked his head at me, so far that it twisted all the way. A 360 until it rested back into normal position. Down the road to the south, the flashing of red and blue lights caught my eye. I turned my head to see two SF SUVs moving up the road. I moved back to look at the being, and he had stepped away from the gate. He began holding down the trigger on his drill so that the whir was there for all to hear. With that he walked off into the desert. The security forces troops showed up 30 seconds later, M4s raised. They demanded me to have my hands raised and to see my security clearance. After all was said and done, I gave my report about everything that happened. The only thing they found near my shack was a faulty electric drill that was continuously running, despite no one holding the trigger. I was relieved of guard duty for a month to get my head straight. The command made a policy that at least 2 people were to be on shift at that gate shack for the rest of the deployment. However, there were still 5 months left in my rotation, and this incident wasn't the last myself or my co-workers would have to deal with the paranormal. Story 10, I'm not myself at night time. Growing up, my friends and I had strange hobbies, having developed a friendship due to a mutual interest in the macabre. Often, we would have sleepovers, and watch horror movies, research haunted places, drive to supposedly haunted places, and sometimes play with the Ouija board. To be honest, I never overly believed it was a spirit moving the planchette. I always thought one of us would try to spice it up and give it a shove for some entertainment. One evening we had decided to research online on how to make a homemade board, using 2 pieces of glass and cut out letters from the alphabet. I must admit, the sound of a glass planchette sliding across a glass board added more of an ominous effect. For whatever reason, we always seemed to get more of an effect using this homemade board, as opposed to any store-bought boards. Now, a bit of a prefix here. I have been told by a psychic that I could be a medium in the sense that spirits could speak through me, and to be mindful of this. Again, another note I figured to be untrue, until this happened. One evening, we are playing, and the board seems to really react when I have my hands hovering over the planchette. This particular game seemed to send chills up my spine, and in fact all of us playing seemed to feel a major drop in temperature. We asked the first question, standard "What is your name?" to which the planchette went to our Roger. So, his name was Roger. Second question. When were you born? To which we were informed 1899, and last question we were able to ask, when did you die? To which the board responded 1945. This is when things seemed to get a little strange. The board began spelling my name repeatedly. A-S-H-L-E-Y. I began getting a little nervous and reacted with frustration towards my friends. It was funny at first, but near the end it was just annoying. We signed off and ended this session. That night was normal. We watched a movie and went to sleep. I had been sound asleep and was awoken by a nudge on my arm. I opened my eyes and it appeared I was having sleep paralysis. All I could see was a dark form above me and long fingers holding my arms down. I will never forget the panic and struggle I felt trying to get out of this entity's grasp. And then I woke up. I wrote it off as a nightmare from all the horror movies and was getting out of bed to start my day. That's when I noticed a bruise on my arms. That seemed to have been left by hands with unusually long fingers. This was the beginning of many nights where I would experience such dreams and awake with bruises. I never really spoke of it out of fear of coming off as a lunatic. After our initial interaction with Roger, the first always seemed to have a smell of, to be frank, body odor and sulfur lingering around. Of course, I initially thought it was me or someone I was with and would smell everyone and myself and was at a complete loss. But stranger than this, when I would have sleepovers with friends, they would always have dreams where I would stand above them and watch them sleep. At first it was laughable, but by the end it seemed to be way too common of an occurrence. A week ago, I had a sleepover with a friend, let's call her Annie. Annie's parents were out of town, so the two of us had the house to ourselves. We spent the night drinking wine, sharing stories, and eventually settled down to watch a movie. After the movie ended, we were both exhausted and decided we should head to bed. Given we had the whole house, Annie slept in her parents' room and I slept in her bedroom. Annie had told me many times of having this recurring nightmare of me standing over her, but still for whatever reason wanted to hang out with me. I had a particularly bad episode of sleep paralysis this night, where I was trying to fight this entity off, and I lost. I woke up to tell Annie about it, only to find her bed was empty. I went out to the living room to find Annie. Nowhere to be found. I went to the kitchen, nowhere to be found. I eventually went and made myself a coffee and sat at the kitchen table waiting. Annie never arrived. I called her cell phone to see if she went out to run an errand, and it was laying in her bed still. But there looked to be blood splatter on it. Stranger than that, the shirt she had been wearing was scattered across the bed, shredded to pieces. I called our other friends to ask if they'd heard from her, and I called her parents. No one knew where she was. I called the police, and they looked through her whole house only to find no evidence of her anywhere. They've since filed a missing persons report. It's been a week, and nobody can find her. I just found a piece of her shirt in the pants I was wearing that night. Annie's missing. And I think I have something to do with it. Story 11, Run. I could feel my mind calming, in line with my body, as my breath went from choked gasps to a rhythmic whooshing. Whoosh. In. Whoosh. Out. There used to be a time, maybe 10 years ago, when I couldn't fathom why someone would want to run just for the sake of running. Now it's my religion. There is a burning, cramping discomfort that settles into a placid euphoria after a few miles. Everything becomes crisp and vibrant, the world seems to shift into a hyper-reality that is normally hidden behind a mundane facade. This is what's called the runner's high. And it's a high I crave 24/7. Today, my breath is even, my gait feels amazing. I feel as though I'm gliding over the pavement. The autumn leaves scatter in a flurry of magnificent color as I pass. The birds sing their agreement in tones as high and clear as a piccolo. I feel the high and it feels like perfection. I slowly become aware of a noise that's not the chitter of squirrels and song of birds that I've become accustomed to. I feel myself start to tense slightly even before I recognize the sound. It's a word. Softly but frantically spoken, an urgent whisper. Run. My first instinct, although slightly spooked, is to laugh. A throaty laugh constricted by my ingrained breathing regimen bubbles out. I'm already running. Plus, why even acknowledge what must be a twisted trick of the wind? Still, the tension in my gut remains. Building even. Run. That time I'm sure I distinctly heard it. My pace quickens slightly, against my own will and better judgment. I can't shake the tension that's quickly budding into fear. The leaves stir up, batting my legs, throwing swirling shadows, colors of fire and blood. The birds shriek, their cries piercing my eardrums, creating a terrifying melody with the accelerating drumbeat of my heart. Run. The origin of the command feels as if it's right behind me, so much so that I can't help but turn toward the source of my terror. The glance affords me nothing but a tree root catching my foot in the moment of inattention. My feet manage to tangle and I go down, instantly catapulted into a painful downhill tumble. Rocks and roots connecting with my right knee, rib cage, and, jarring me completely, my right temple. I lay for a moment, groaning. There's no time to probe the injuries, I must run. Run from what though? Doesn't matter, I just need to move. I will my body to spring into action, but it refuses to do more than sluggishly stir against the trail. Are you all right? Excuse me, are you okay? The voice seems to drift through the haze, but as soon as I'm conscious of it, I use it as a point to concentrate on, to pull myself out of the fall-induced stupor. Hello, miss, are you okay? I finally look up from my position on the ground to see a man in his 50s, looking concerned. Yes, I think I'm all right, I reply. Relief instantly floods his expression and he extends his hand to help me up. Reaching for his hand, he continues, "That's good to hear because you need to run." What? The half-smile I had put on in reaction to a stranger's kindness instantly melts. Cold sweat breaks out all over and my bowels feel alarmingly loose. The strength of the terror's grip surprises me, choking me, paralyzing me. The man leans in, eyes glossy, unblinking, a strange mixture of apathy and intent. His mouth slowly creaks open, stretching. I can only stare in horror as it stretches behind humanly possible. One sick, bloated moment passes before he sucks in air with such force it whistles going into his lungs. One word issues from his gaping maw, shouted with as many decibels as a foghorn, "Ruyuan." I begin hyperventilating violently, air ripping at my throat making it raw, as everything dissolves and I awake to my new reality. Someone is still screaming "run" repeatedly at the top of their lungs and I realize belatedly that it's me. I stop and everything goes quiet except for the incessant dripping that accompanies my thoughts during the waking hours. I take a quick mental inventory of my body. It's still in a sorry state after my last beating when I broke the fucked up rules of this dark realm. My ankle, ribs, and temple throb in time with my heartbeat, the head injury sending shooting pains through my skull. Finally, as I gulp past the dryness and soreness in my throat and my eyes adjust, I see my captor standing over the cage. He appears to be bemused, a half-smile twisting his face into something darker, more vile than the uncaring attitude he usually takes with me. "It's too late for running, you know that, right? You're mine now.